It's really not the weapons that are dangerous. It's the people you have to worry about.
Welcome to Heartland Arms, where skill, safety, and training all come together. I'm Michael, and today we're going to be going over caliber and ballistics. Now, this is a very, very complex when you start to talk about ballistics. We can get complex, we will get complex in later shows, but we're going to just go over basic information here, okay? We're going to start very simple and just kind of break it down in a very easy to understand going through. So, we're going to go to my mat. I love this mat. This mat is by Allen.com. So, in fact, the website's right here, www.byallen.com. I've had this mat for I don't even know how long, okay? I've had it for a long time. But what this show is, we're going to understand what a caliber is, how rounds are sized, basic ballistics on how the bullet basically behaves. We're not going to go over any math charts. We're just going to explain it in plain language, and I do have a little bit here that I'm going to show you. That's why I like this mat. It's huge. I use it for a lot of stuff, so we're going to use it for training here. So, when you talk about a caliber, that is the diameter of the bullet. That is basically how wide it is, okay? So calibers are measured in two different ways, inches and millimeters. So when we talk about a 22, a 25, a 32, those are going to be in inches, okay? And then you have millimeters. That's when you're going to get into the 9 millimeter, the 5.56 millimeter, 7.62. Those are going to be, rifle rounds there. And some of the, and we're going to go through some examples. And my example isn't actually on here for a 22. So a 22 is actually a 22 is a 22.22 inch diameter, which is a very small, lightweight, low recoil round. That's what it is right there. I have a little 22 there. I'll move it over here. It's tiny, okay? So when I compare that to a 45, and I compare that to some other rounds, that's a very, very tiny bullet. And we're talking about the bullet, not the whole cartridge. That's a 22 cartridge. And I'm going to put it right next to the 223. The 223, or sometimes it's called a 5.56 or 5.56. That's what the NATO round is called. Those bullets are the same. Now, the cartridge is what's going to be different on those. And then, of course, you have your 9 millimeter, and then I'll put that right up there. So, and it's going to roll. So, you have your 9 millimeter. You have 45. That's a pretty big, heavy round because that's on the edge here. Where my 223, which is also a 5.56. That's going to be very, very similar. We're going to get through what the differences between a 223 and a 5.56 are later. A 308, which is 308, which is also a 7.62 NATO round as well. We're going to get into the differences with those. Again, we covered don't mix rounds. Knowing what you're doing is very important. Calibers must match the markings on the firearm. A 9 millimeter round does not go into a 40, and a 40 doesn't go into a 9 millimeter. It's very important that we keep what we're shooting with the type of firearms that we're shooting, okay? Now, many people think a bigger bullet is more powerful. And that's not really the case. It's not always true. There's a lot of factors that depends on. And that's where we're getting into the ballistic side of this stuff, okay? So, a lot of stuff, even though it's small, could mean that it's not just, the bullet size matters, but a lot of things that go into this is the speed, bullet weight, and what it's made to do. So, for example, here's your 223. It's a very small round, but it travels extremely fast, and it's great for distance shooting, okay? Now, when you go into a 45 is a lot bigger bullet than this rifle bullet. However, it is slower and heavier, and it's also good. It's good for close range. So, it's not always about the size. There's a lot of stuff that goes into that. Ballistics is just a fancy word of saying how does that bullet perform and how does it fly through the air. So, you have internal ballistics, okay? You have internal ballistics. That's actually what's happening inside your firearm. So, let's go to the front camera here. So, this is your firearm. You have ballistics that happens inside this, okay? The ballistics that happens inside this is that hammer hits the primer. That primer is then going to start the powder burning. The ballistics inside happens when that gas builds up and that bullet is starting to travel down the barrel, okay? The longer the barrel, depending on rifling, is going to mean how that bullet is going to start to behave and what's going to happen from here. If you have rifling, it's going to start twisting that bullet, and it's going to create a rotation on that bullet to stabilize it, okay? Then you have the external ballistics. That's from this point on. That's when it leaves the barrel and goes through. Now, we live on Earth. Gravity happens. Gravity happens really quick. So as soon as that bullet leaves this barrel, it's going to, it's going to start dropping because it's going to be under the effects of gravity. So sometimes that bullet's going to rise because as that gas pressure builds up, depending on how that was built, sometimes that bullet will be pushed up some. Sometimes it will go straight. Sometimes it actually starts to go down right away. Depending on how it's built and how the internal combustion works in here is going to affect the external ballistics here. So that bullet leaves there. It is now subjected to gravity and wind. Lighter bullets will travel faster but may drift more in the wind. Heavier bullets are slower but stays a little bit more on target on the wind. However, the heavier that it is, the more gravity is going to affect it. So you have to keep that in mind here. So that's internal, external, and then you have terminal ballistics, okay? What happens when the bullet hits the target? So, different calibers, which is, let's go to the top. So here's your calibers, right? These, depending on what you're using and what it's made for, is going to determine the terminal ballistics. That's what happens when one of these bullets hits the target. So if you're doing self-defense, hunting, target shooting, these are all going to, based on what you're shooting, go through. So if you're shooting a paper target, there's not anything that's not enough to stop one of these. You're going to see, that's why you have to be prepared on what's beyond your target too. Okay? If you're shooting something that's solid, or a metal plate, that bullet is going to stop. It sometimes can ricochet and bounce backwards too. Now, it also matters on most of what this portray and everything that I have on the table here is called a full metal jacket. Okay, these just punch through. Generally, these are practice rounds and range ammo. You also have what is called a hollow point. Hollow points will have it won't have a tip on it. It's almost like a hole in the front of the barrel. Generally, these are designed to expand on impact and generally used on self-defense. That's typically what they're for. Now, when you're going through, like we said, depending on what you're shooting, what you're doing, the bullet size, each one has a different goal, really. So when we're talking like a 22 here, this is called most 22s are going to be rimfire. So it means that striker pin hits the rim of this. It's going to ignite that fire, that gunpowder in there, start the fire, expand the gas, shoot the bullet. This is great for target shooting. It's great for training because it's cheap, easy, less recoil in this. It's also good for small game. So if you're hunting rabbit, squirrel, little creatures, this is really a good round to use. Now, when you get into the 9mm, and that's right where my finger is here, that's the 9mm. This is a handgun round. It could be shot in some carbine rifles. This is a really good self-defense round. It's also really good for target shooting. This is kind of a real basic round that you're going to see a lot of. You could go into the 45. This is also a handgun round. This is really good for defense as well. This also has a lot of recoil. So that one can get, for someone that's not a avid shooter, I would say some kids, you probably don't want to start them off on a 45. That's where you start them off on this side of it with a 22. Then you have your rifle rounds. You have your 223 and your 5.56. This is good for target shooting. It is good for defense, sport shooting, and I call it also a varmint. So if you are used to shooting, think of something like coyotes or something like that. This is a good round for something small that you're going to shoot and go from there. Now, that's a 223. On the other side here, I have our 308 or 7.62. This is good for hunting long range. So if you're hunting deer, something along those lines, this is probably in this neighborhood you're going to be in. And then, of course, you have your 12 gauge shotgun, which there's our shotgun right there. 12 gauge, and you have different gauges as well. Shotguns uses a gauge system. We're going to go into those when we actually start covering shotguns. But 12 gauge is good for hunting, defense, depending on what kind of shot you have. There's a lot that goes along with shotguns, so keep that in mind as well. So anytime you're dealing with, and I told you, we're going to keep it very simple. I didn't want to get too crazy with the ballistics here. I wanted to kind of keep it very simple. Ballistics can get very complicated very quickly. We're going to show one more thing because I have it on this chart here. Let me move this mat around here. And then let's go back to the overhead here. Just because I like this little chart here. This is called the trajectory here. So if you notice that you have your line of sight, which is these arrows here. And if you notice that here's our barrel. Now our barrel's pointed up. So the line of the sight barrel is here. your sights are here, and then you have it yardage indicated. So you can see the trajectory, and this is the 223 says it's for reference only. So you see it's going to shoot up, and then you notice it's not going to travel this line here. That bullet's going to, because gravity, wind, all kinds of stuff is going to drop it. So when you sight in a rifle, you have to sight it in with what yardage you're looking for. Okay, you can't just take a rifle out there and say, yep, I've got it sighted in, I can shoot it here, but if it was sighted for 100 yards and you're shooting beyond that or closer to that, you're not going to be on target. So you have to understand the basic ballistics on the distance that you're shooting on and the trajectory of that bullet that's going to travel. So there's a lot of stuff that goes through there. So keep that in mind when you're doing that. You have to understand what you're using your firearm for. Are you hunting? What distance are you shooting that from? There's a lot of factors that go into this, which is why it makes firearms such a complex animal. I think that's kind of why I like them, because they're pretty cool to see how the engine inside works. I'm curious by nature, so I'm not one of these. I don't want to hurt anybody, but I like these because I like to see the ingenuity that's in there. I like to see how it works, and it's kind of a fascinating, how that works in there. So keep that in mind. So caliber is just your bullet size, okay? Use the correct caliber with the correct gun that you're using. We're going to get into 7.62 308 because certain firearms, if you're using rifles, and when we get into rifles, we're going to go into those a little bit better. But there's a rule for 223 and 5.56 because they're very similar, and 7.62 and 308. Those are very similar, and if you shoot the wrong one from the wrong firearm, you can potentially look for the damage. Always look that up and make sure you know what you're doing when you're doing that. Bigger is not necessarily better. It's what you're using it for. And understanding basic ballistics is just how this thing operates and what happens when you trigger certain events. That's all it is. So I hope everybody likes, follows, subscribes to us. Make sure, it's hard to get a GunTube channel going, but we are here to educate, train, teach people. Some people know more than others. We're starting basic. We're gonna move on. So if you're at the beginner level, great. Enjoy, like, subscribe. If you're more advanced, nice to have a little refresher course. Go through it. Maybe share this with someone that's a new shooter. I love seeing new shooters all the time. Make sure that you're sharing that with them. Maybe get a little refresher for you. Maybe you learned something that maybe you didn't quite know. Maybe you knew some advanced, but you missed a simple step down the road. Either way, I hope you like, subscribe, and follow us on all our socials and all our channels. Make sure that no matter what your experience is, you do keep learning, you stay safe, and you stay ready. Until the next episode, we'll see you then.